Recognize the member for Vancouver West End.
Thank you, Honourable Speaker. Well, I didn't even say a word, and the member for Kamloops South was already applauding. I think we're starting well. Honourable Speaker, it's good to be back in the House, and I'll take credit even if it's not due me, but he was applauding his friend, but there you go. I just wanted to thank the Honourable Speaker for having me speak, but the member for his amendment, because it's sparked a debate here in this House, a debate we need to have more often, a discussion we need to have more often, which is about climate change and the climate crisis, which is plainly staring us in the face, but maybe because it's been staring us in the face for so long now, we've just gotten used to it. Unfortunately, this throne speech and the amendment which tries to fix it, I don't think do the job justice. I think, as we've seen, this government mouths platitudes, say they feel our pain about climate change, and then do nothing. In fact, work hard in some ways to actually exacerbate the problem. And that is a crisis. That is a problem for our generations today, but our generations to come. The member has put forward an amendment. He's offered his suggestion of one way that we could address climate change. And he's also, of course, in his other life and here in this House spoken about other ways. But I think if we're going to amend a throne speech, we need to amend it in such a way that we can support it. And amending this throne speech with this amendment will not make this throne speech supportable. A bad throne speech, a bad vision, is still a bad vision, even if you amend it with one small change, which may address one part of climate change in the discussion, but doesn't deal with the reality that BC should have a plan, needs a plan, must have a plan, but doesn't have one. We need real action to reduce BC's greenhouse gas emissions, and that should have been in the throne speech. We need real action now to do that because it's a cost which is costing us more and more each day. But of course, a throne speech can't be amended just to address one aspect if it's so vacant and bare in others. Of course, child poverty, worst province in Canada for years upon years upon years, which of course means selling out our future opportunities, selling out the kids of today, and our future economy. Of course, we also have other challenges, whether it's healthcare and the fact that it's getting harder for some people to access it, social services, not getting the attention they need to make sure we have communities that work for everyone, and so on.
Member, can I draw you back to debate on the amendment?
Of course. Thank you, Honourable Speaker. A real plan for climate action in BC is needed because the realities of climate change are hurting our economy today. They're hurting our society today. I think you look at the pine beetle, something that we've talked about here many, many, many times and affects many of our communities. What caused it? The pine beetle, you'll say. Well, what caused the pine beetle to continue reproducing through the winter so that it could expand throughout such vast swaths of British Columbia, killing wood after tree after tree after tree? Well, that was climate change. That was a real impact today. So sometimes people say we should act now to address climate change for our grandchildren. Well, we should act now to address climate change for us today, because the reality of it is here. Thousands upon thousands of jobs lost because of climate change. Alberta hit with the worst environmental disaster in its history because of climate change, spending billions upon billions due to storm damage. Our neighbors to the south in California, of course, a drought of historic proportions, and to the east, an ice storm of historic proportions. Seems you turn on the news today, you hear about weird weather just about everywhere, and often described as the worst storm in known history. All because of climate change, Honourable Speaker. So when people say we need to act to fight climate change, and we hear back from the other side, oh, well, that'll cost money. Well, it's costing us money doing nothing now. It's costing us way more now and way, way more in the future unless we act today. Hurricane Sandy on the eastern seaboard, they say the damage from that one storm is up to $65 billion. This is not a problem for the future, but for today. So what does that look like? The House will remember we voted to cut our emissions by 33% of 2007 levels by 2020. 33% cut. That's a sizable cut. The initial plan identified that as a big goal to reach, but one we could reach if we put our minds together and if we collectively acted. And yet, when I ask for a plan today, when I ask the government today, what's the plan to do that? Nothing. There is no plan. You search for it through freedom of information, they have no plan beyond today, aside from stepping on the gas. A plan to fight climate change would invest in transit, yet this government refuses, costing us $1.5 billion annually, according to the Board of Trade, and untold costs to our health and, of course, the climate. A plan to fight climate change would invest in green energy retrofits to help people reduce their own gas consumption, insulate homes and public buildings, and save power. Yet the government largely cut that program. A plan to address climate change, and this is happening down in the United States now, would actually have the environmental assessment and environmental impact assessment processes consider the cumulative impacts of industrial development, including the resultant climate change in industries where there are high emissions. Yet for project after project, including projects which are being considered for implementation now, this government refuses, passes the buck. We need to know the costs of development, not just the purported benefits. And a plan to fight climate change would take into account the real cost of pollution. If you talk to people in the oil and gas industry, they've been talking about how they know that there will have to be a price put on carbon. They know there'll have to be a price put on pollution because they know that they should be paying their fair share because they're putting pollution and the cost of that on our children. Yet this government refuses to even consider actions which other governments have taken in that regard. Now, these are just a few items, a few possibilities we should debate, discuss, consider if we're serious about addressing climate change, if we're serious about creating a prosperous future, if we're serious about creating thousands more jobs for British Columbia. So I'd invite the other side to take action, to consider a plan, to actually bring a real plan that invites British Columbians to get their best, not a plan which is myopic and forgets the future. I thank the member for raising his amendment and for raising the big gaping hole in this legislature, which will be looked back by our children and our children's children with concern, with a question of, you started to act, but then you stopped. Why? Why are you selling out our future? A future that needs a stable climate, not a climate of crisis, not a climate where we burn and burn and burn and lose the species and many of the habitats and the agriculture and the forests and the things that we all hold so dear, our salmon, of course, impacted by climate change as well. These are all realities that we're facing. So, Honourable Speaker, I urge this government to act, and I urge this government to bring in a real throne speech, which has a real suite of policies, a real plan to address climate change. Because one amendment, while I appreciate the spirit, doesn't quite do it. We need a real plan to address climate change, and we need it now. Thank you, Honourable Speaker.